Hello everyone, and welcome to Simple Therapist. Now, who am I? I am a social work practitioner who works with children who are dealing with a series of psychiatric disorders and behaviors that make them at risk for hospitalization. I also work with the parents and the families of those clients. Now, for me personally, I'm brand new to the field. I've been working as a social worker for a little under 3 years. However, when you manage a caseload, you learn a lot very quickly. So today I wanted to discuss what I've learned when it comes to working with parents of clients, specifically children, adolescents, etc. Now, in this video specifically, I wanted to discuss complicated or complex parents. Now, when I say complicated, we're going to break this down into 3 categories: parents who constantly test boundaries, parents who talk too much, and parents who do not believe that strongly in the concept of mental health. Now, me personally, I have engaged in interactions with parents who would sort of ascribe to all 3 respectively. And so we're going to get into not only my experiences, but my recommendations when it comes to navigating these parents. Now, if you have any questions or would like to add on to these concepts, if you disagree with me, please let me know in the comment section below. And with all of that said, let's get right into the video. Now, the first category that we're going to tackle today are parents who constantly test boundaries. In my very short experience as a social worker, some of the ways in which parents have tested my boundaries are the following: calling outside of my work hours, using language that is offensive or passive aggressively bad talking you during session, and asking for services that are outside of the scope of the reason that I am there. So for example, examples are pretty nice, so let's get into one. Most of my treatment plans are sort of tailored towards child-oriented goals, family-oriented goals, and parenting-oriented goals. Now, marriage counseling is outside of my scope of expertise, as are a lot of things. Personally, I find it pretty interesting, but I'm just not there yet, one step at a time. Now, can we delegate a few goals here and there that are tailored towards parent A and parent B improving their communication? Of course. However, in my prior experience, I've been asked to provide services within the realm or ballpark of parent A and parent B's relationship specifically, and that's not what I'm there for. Now, here are some of the methods that I've learned in order to address some of these things, whether it's through personal experimentation, supervisions, and discussing ideas with coworkers who are more seasoned than I am. So you want to avoid the parent shutting down. That's priority number 1. This will likely depend on the parent's personality traits and what they're equipped with, but people respond differently to critiques, so it's important to keep this nuance in mind. And you'll likely have a hunch based off of the rapport that you've built with that parent, so definitely assess the situation. I like to say that a lot. Now, in order to avoid the parent shutting down, you want to make sure that the child is not present for this conversation. That's super important. The last thing you want is for your parent to feel undermined by you calling them out in front of everyone or their child, when you could have easily designated a time for you to have a one-on-one conversation that's far more productive. That way they can hear you out individually and also apply what you've discussed to the next family session. It is also important that us as social work practitioners operate on a strength-based approach. Now, what do I mean by that? The strength-based approach is sort of like a framework in social work tailored towards emphasizing the positive traits of a situation or a family. So the positive qualities, the positive aspects, looking at the glass half full as opposed to half empty. So with that said, preface your statement with a strength that parent possesses. So say, I can really tell that you care about your child. I can tell that you're passionate about your child's mental health needs. And then get into the statement that you're trying to address, the boundary that you feel like is being stress tested. So for example, let's say I had a parent who was constantly calling me on the weekends or texting me, and my company, for example, has a no text policy. And the next day I was having a parent session. I would say something along the lines of, I appreciate that you want to keep me up to date and genuinely want to keep me informed, but I want to remind you of the boundary that I do have regarding, phone calls on the weekends or, text. And then you can get into the company's policy if you wanted to, or just keep it very simple. And then you want to end with, does that make sense? Is there any confusion at all? Things like that. And with that question in particular, it's thoughtful because it puts the ball in their court to demonstrate that they understand that you're establishing that boundary. You may have a parent who doesn't quite understand and tries to continue to test it live, right there. And that's where you can have a responsible dialogue, and where you can give them the opportunity to sort of explain their side. Please do not budge. If there is a situation in which you do not want to receive text or you do not want to work on the weekend and they're constantly trying to inform you, to call you, do not budge. Hear them out, of course. That's, what the therapeutic environment is for, but make sure you do not budge on your non-negotiables. Now, the next topic is parents who talk too much. This is a fun one. Now, what do I mean by that? What do I mean by parents who talk too much? I'm talking about those parents where from the moment you get into session till the moment you get out, they are talking. They are yapping, as the kids would say. Now, I want to make sure this is super clear that we as practitioners want to make sure that we are reaching out a helping hand, no doubt about it. However, we do have a goal in mind and we do have a limited time frame. These things can present in different ways. I had a parent where, for example, I remember asking, how is client? How is, and I mentioned their name, and she went on a tangent regarding her errands, her shopping list, how the sibling of the client was doing. I didn't ask for any of this, but because I was new to the field and didn't have that confrontational skill sort of worked on, I just let her talk. I had another instance in which I had a parent of a client scheduled for a parent session. Mom was not able to make it, and so I had a session with stepdad, and this step parent began to spill everything, and I mean everything. They mentioned how they couldn't put up with the client's behaviors anymore, with their tantrums. They couldn't put up with the disrespect. They even mentioned complications within their relationship between, step parent and parent, bringing up intimacy, bringing up arguments, stuff that I didn't necessarily need to know, and almost to the point where they presented as manic, as if they were completely out of control of what they were saying, how they were feeling, just completely broken. So two very different circumstances, and yet in my opinion would fall under the category of talking too much. So here's a tip that is super simple, and I've actually began to implement this on a regular basis so that I do not forget. It becomes habit and it makes session much easier. When you enter a session with that parent, make sure to clearly outline the objectives of the session. Right off the bat, you want to put that level of accountability on them, but also have a reference point to where in the event that they begin to talk too much about something completely unrelated, don't be afraid to go back to the thing that you mentioned at the beginning of the session. Say, I hate to cut you off, but I want to make sure we keep in mind the treatment plan that we have to get done, or the assessment questions that I have to ask you. As far as the way you interject, this is something that you just have to practice, whether it's in supervision or in front of the mirror, and also with clients and parents. You have to take that risk as well, because otherwise you get steamrolled. So try to practice the way in which you interject. So something along the lines of, hey, I would hate to cut you off, but is it okay if we put a pin on the story? I'm very much invested, but if we have time at the end, we can get back to it. But also mention, the time frame, and I don't have a lot of time with you guys today, but I do want to make sure we accomplish this one task. Is it okay if we work on that? Now, on the other end of the spectrum, let's get back to the step parent scenario. Now, this is something that is super important to keep in mind, and that is the fact that there's not a lot of people who have access to a therapist or someone that they're able to talk to and spell out all of these grievances, all of these complaints towards. And you might just be the only person, never mind social worker, person that this parent or step parent can talk to about their grievances or their current situation or things that they've been burying for years, quite frankly. So my advice would be let them talk, let them have that opportunity, let them have that space, but also keep in mind not only your boundaries, but your role. Certain things do not have to be responded to, and you can articulate why. And then once you allow them a space in which they can be heard, refer back to the objectives of the session that were mentioned in the first place. And now this rarely happens, but it's also something to keep in mind. We work with a variance of different families and complexities. In the event that you begin to feel uncomfortable, let's say that parent is becoming too animated, too close to your bubble, it's okay to let them know how you are feeling. Say, hey, I understand you're very passionate about this, but I'm getting a little bit uncomfortable, and I can tell you're getting worked up. And if they don't back down or cool down a little bit or take 5 minutes to cool off, then it's okay to end session early, especially if you're feeling on the verge of threatened. Hopefully not, but again, these things happen. You're in the homes, or they're in your office, and these are sensitive trigger points for them. As far as your role, remember, you are not there to necessarily solve their problems. So do not provide a quick fix in the moment because you're nervous or feel pressured by their animated spirit. Listen and reflect back what they're saying so that they can hear for themselves, but from a more professional standpoint. The goal is always to be productive, and if it's not getting to that point, then you can either redirect or end session early. Now, the last subject that we're going to cover are parents who do not believe that strongly in the mental health field. So, story time. I had a father of a client who came from a cultural background where mental health conditions and concerns are often minimized rather than legitimate health concerns. He would mention how emotional struggles are sometimes seen as something you can think your way out of, rather than something that requires sort of like the support from family or mental health providers. Now, this may not necessarily fit the prompt for difficult parents, but it can certainly approach that line if a conversation is not had early. The buy-in from the parents in the form of implementing your recommendations is imperative. So when you have that sit-down conversation with that parent, make sure to come from a point of curiosity. Check your own bias. Do not enter the conversation trying to convince them. This is not a debate by any means, but make sure you are prepared for the conversation. conversation and have a general understanding of what you were talking about. This is where, after hearing them out, you can provide some sort of psychoeducation on mental health. So psychoeducation is the teaching or informing to your parents, families, clients of vital information that pertains to the mental health field, diagnoses, presenting symptoms, etc. And if you are prepared, you will speak about what you know. So for example, if you operate under an agency, you could speak about the tools and the instruments that you utilize. You can describe the model to the parent. You can describe the process of treatment. Describe the general idea of identifying the negative behaviors that are displayed and how you want to supplement them with alternative behaviors, such as coping skills, for example. You can describe the feelings portion of the brain, the amygdala, and how it's far more developed than the impulse control section of the brain, that being the prefrontal cortex for that child at that age. All these little concepts you can do research on, add them together, and make a coherent thought and display the reason in which you are there in the first place. So those are my quick thoughts regarding those 3 categories of difficult parents. If you guys like the video, of course, feel free to leave a like, share it with someone who's in the mental health field, who is new, who is an emerging social work practitioner, and hopefully it helps them. But that's all I have for you guys today. Have a good one.